And this is Null 404 here tonight with Techno Boozer talking about RSA. All you, Mike.
All right. Hi, everyone. My name is Mike. I've been a software engineer for the past 10 years or so, focusing on cybersecurity for the past two. Um, but around here, most people know me as Techno or Techno Boozer. I'm the team captain for our CTF group here. So shout out to that. If anything that I talk about is interesting to you tonight, feel free to DM me and get you on that CTF team. Um, but some of the things I found most interesting in these CTF competitions has been the cryptography, the crypto stuff. And that's part of what I'm going to talk about tonight. So let's get into it. What is RSA? Um, so the first thing that I thought about when I started investigating this is obviously it's an encryption algorithm. So just a way to scramble some data in such a way that only the people that you want can unscramble it, or more accurately, the people that have the keys can unscramble it. Um, if you look it up on Wikipedia, it'll tell you that it's a public key crypto system. Um, so hopefully by the end of the tonight, you'll get an idea of what that is. But in short, instead of having a secret key for encryption that you have to keep to yourself, there's a part of it that you can share with the public. And then crypto system here just means that it's not just about encryption. There's also some other primitives like how do you transform data from one form into the form that you need it, or padding or stuff like that. Um, it's also used in certificates pretty highly. So this is why I called it the backbone of online security. For the longest time, it's been pretty important to certificates. Like if you've ever been to a web page that uses HTTPS, that little lock icon is telling you that it's using most of the time an RSA certificate. Um, just a way to ensure that the website that you're talking to is indeed the website you think you're talking to. And if you click on that more information button there and dig a little deeper, um, you'll get this kind of information. So you can look at the bottom of this picture here. It says you've got your public key info using RSA, key size 2048, exponent and modulus, and I'll explain all that in a second. Um, you might have also used RSA if you've ever set up SSH so that you can log into a server without typing in your name and password all the time. Um, so I just put in a quick screenshot here of what that key generation looks like. Um, and then at the bottom there, you can see that two keys were generated. The ID test key is the private part that you keep to yourself. And then the .pub is what you would share with that other server so that it knows that it's you. Um, RSA is also a company. Um, if you've seen these little time-based code hardware devices, this is made by that company. And as Floppy put in the chat, RSA is also a conference, and I believe this company puts it on. A question I didn't expect to be answering when I started this is, who is RSA? Yes, and I'll talk a little bit on digital signatures in a little bit, but mostly I'm going to be focusing on encryption tonight. So who is RSA? RSA actually stands for the names of these three guys. You've got Ron Rivest, Adi Shamir, and Len Edelman. These guys were students at MIT back in the late 70s when they came up with this encryption algorithm. And to get an idea of the problem that they were trying to solve, let's go back to the late 70s. How is RSA? That'll be soon. So let's say back in the late 70s, and you've just watched Rocky, and you've got a great idea for Rocky 2, Punches to Punchlines. and you want to send it over to Mr. Stallone over here. The encryption algorithms that existed at the time, you just had one key to turn what you were looking for into that scrambled data. You can send that scrambled data over to Mr. Stallone there, but the issue is, how are you going to transmit that key? If you send it at the same time that you send that encrypted data, anybody that manages to intercept that can just unlock it right away. You wouldn't send a lock with the key. So you could use a courier or meet up with Mr. Stallone here in person. But there's a better way, and that's what RSA founded a multi-million-dollar company. So the idea for this is, instead of one key used for encryption, basically everybody that wants to talk here comes up with two keys that are kind of linked together. Their public key and their private key. So in this instance, if I'm wanting to encrypt this super killer screenplay here, I'm going to take Stallone's public key and encrypt it. And now at this point, when I send it to him, he's going to use his private key to decrypt it. And because those two keys are linked, Stallone here is the only one that can decrypt it. So that's a pretty quick overview of that. But how did they do it in practice? That's what I spent most of my time investigating. The short answer is math. It's always math in cryptography. The longer answer is this math. Hopefully it doesn't look too complicated, because this is one of the simplest forms of cryptography. Basically, this is just saying, if you've got some message that you want to transmit M, to encrypt it, all you have to do is turn it into a number and multiply it by itself E times. E is some number that we'll talk about in a minute. And then to decrypt it, you just take that ciphertext, M to the E, and you raise it to another power, D. And all this is happening modulo N. So for anyone that's not big into programming, let's talk about that part on the right there, that mod N. So modular arithmetic is what's going on here. Some of you might be familiar with it, but I know all of you know how to do it, assuming that you know how to tell time. So if it's 11:45 and I say I'll meet you in 2 hours, I'm not going to meet you at 13:45 unless you're in the military. It's going to be 1:45. So that process of, when you get to the top of the clock, you start over again. That's modular arithmetic. And that number at the top is called the modulus. And for RSA, this clock just happens to be pretty big, between 200 and 1200 decimal places long. So the next part, the modulus N. This is simultaneously the easiest part to calculate, and also the most important for the security of this whole thing. So it's pretty simple. You're just multiplying two numbers together. The only requirement here is that these numbers P and Q be prime numbers, and also they be pretty big. And the reason that this works is because if I give you two numbers and ask you what they multiply together to, that turns out to be pretty easy. But if I ask you the reverse, if I give you a number and ask you, what numbers multiply together to make that, P is pretty big. That turns out to be an extremely difficult prospect, especially with numbers as big as are used in RSA. So when you see the key size or the bit encryption, this is what they're talking about. when you come up with this number n, how many digits long is it? So for 2048-bit encryption, that's 600 digits, or 1,200 digits for 4096-bit. There's one more thing that I need to mention, and that's this little guy here, phi n. I'll be honest, I'm not 100% on the math behind this, but just keep this in the back of your head. There's this other number that you need in the future. That's just 1 minus these numbers p and q multiplied together. So we've got n. Now, what about e, this exponent, this thing that we're multiplying the number by, or the power raising it to? You want to keep it fairly small, but it could be basically every number or any number. The only requirement here is that it needs to be relatively prime to that phi n that I mentioned and told you not to think too much about. But in practice, pretty much everybody uses this number here, 2 to the 16 plus 1. This number itself is a prime number, so no need to worry about that phi n. Yeah, that's pretty much it for E. So E being your public exponent, the thing that you share with other people. This is probably the most complicated part of RSA, figuring out what your private exponent is, D here. So there's a big word for this. It's called the modular multiplicative inverse of E. But basically all it is, if you imagine that the message you want to encrypt lives somewhere on this n-sized clock that you have, when you multiply it by itself e times, you can imagine that like spinning around the clock over and over again. And wherever that lands on the clock, that's going to be your ciphertext, the thing that you would transmit over the line. And so D is the number where if you start that process again, spinning around the clock, you end up back at your message where you were in the first place. While it's a little more difficult to understand, calculating it is actually super easy. And I've got a little bit of Python here. You basically just take your public exponent, raise it to the -1 power, modulo that phi n that I had talked about earlier. And then the only thing you need to make sure of is that when you multiply E times D, you get 1 on a phi n sized clock. That's basically it. That's about, it's not quite all you need to know. But this is the basics of the math behind what makes RSA work. So you can see on the bottom of the screen there, the keys that you actually use for this. It's just a list of 2 numbers. You got the size of your clock and the exponent for your public key, and then the size of your clock and the inverse of E as your private key. So at this point, I'm going to start showing some stuff that I found in CTFs, but are there any questions before I do that?
I'm gonna have to watch 3 more videos on that concept alone.
Yeah, I spent a long time figuring it out, and sometimes I feel like I need to learn it more too. And it's actually one of the simpler encryption algorithms. All right, so sorry, Barry. So what I've got on screen right now is one of the crypto challenges for the Cyberpocalypse event that Hack the Box put on this year. I think it was back in February. It's a pretty simple thing that they gave us. Just this Python code up here, and then this output file down here. So they generate their n. It's a prime number. And then this E is 2 to the 16 plus 1, so they're using the normal E. get the ciphertext by raising it to the power, and then throw it out on the command line. So does anybody see what's wrong with this code here? Why it might not be very secure? I'll give you 3 more seconds.
Quality of the primes?
Quality of the primes? What do you mean?
Like you'd have to have a prime number that's actually useful for cryptography. It has to be big enough.
Right. So yeah, that's they're using this function from the PyCryptoDome library, which I've looked into the implementation a little bit. Basically, just it gets a random number and then checks to see if it's prime, and then gets another random number and keeps trying until it works. So this is actually right, but you were kind of close.
The quality of the random numbers used.
Nope, it's actually even more simple than that. And these are the kind of simple problems that can really bite you in the ass. What they're doing here is, multiplying everything in this list together, but they chose the wrong range. So 2 to the 0 ends up being 1. So for their the size of their clock, they just used a single prime number here. And if you remember that that equation that I had talked about to get the private key, turns out to be pretty easy to solve. So this was my solution here on the right. All I did was I said the private key is the modulus -1. So this is probably the simplest crypto challenge that that you'll find, as long as you know how to do math in your head correctly. And I've got the flag down here for that. Now I will add, when I wrote this code, I didn't realize that it was this easy to find the private exponent. And I'll do a couple of times here. And I had to ask ChatGPT how to find the modular inverse. So if you're worried that, maybe I'm some kind of genius that just knows math really well, I assure you I don't. I use AI just like the rest of us. All right, so the next one, this is actually from a CTF that happened just this weekend, just this past weekend. This one took a little bit more to figure out, but ended up being pretty satisfying in the end. I'll go through what the code is doing, but go ahead and see if you can figure out what's wrong here as I go through it. So starting off, they decided to choose their own number here for the public exponent. This is the bit size that they'll use down below. And then we've got infinite loop here that just calculates a new n, a new clock size each time. And I'll just point out real quickly, when they do get prime size, the size of your key is twice this. So the effective key size is 2048 bits for this particular thing. You've got 2 options here. You can either choose to encrypt your own message, or to get an encrypted output of the flag. So again, I'll give you guys a couple of minutes to scratch your heads and figure out what might be wrong here. So I also used ChatGPT to help me figure out what was wrong here. At first, I thought that it might be something with this public exponent, because 1337 ends up not being a prime number. But there's something else here, when you encrypt something with RSA and you're only doing the basic, multiply it by itself e number of times, turns out there's kind of a vulnerability, you might say here. There's this thing called the Chinese remainder theorem that basically says if you get this number of ciphertexts, you can trivially calculate what that message was. So in this case, we know that every time we ask for the flag, we're going to get a new encryption of that flag. So the message that's being transmitted is the same every time. It's just we're doing it on a different clock. So I'm not going to go over as much of the solution for this. Just keep in mind that there's this thing called the Chinese remainder theorem, and feel free to look that up on Wikipedia if you've got the time. But the actual code is just asking the server for that E number of ciphertexts, so 1,337, and then running that function, and that outputs the that flag there. And again, in case you think I'm some sort of genius, I basically took this code from good old Stack Overflow, or the cryptography version of Stack Overflow. And I can put that in the chat if anybody's brain hasn't exploded yet. All right, so, all right, just a few more things I wanted to touch on. So this Chinese remainder theorem, you might think that that's a pretty big vulnerability for RSA. Because the normal E that you would use, 65,000 or whatever, that might be a lot for us to calculate, but it's not too much for a nation state to calculate. So the last thing that you might want to know about RSA is the padding that it uses to prevent that kind of get the same message over and over again kind of attack. Again, I'm not going to go too deep into this. All I really want to show is that instead of just directly encrypting the thing that you want to send, you'll put it at the mouse pointer. There we go. So you put your message at the end of this block here. You add some padding zeros and a hash, and then just any old random number here. You scramble it around a little bit, and then the thing that you actually encrypt is this big guy down here. The idea being that if you encrypt the same thing over and over again, you're going to use a different seed. It's going to be random and look different each time. So it's not really feasible to do that attack that I just showed. All right, last couple of things here. So you might imagine the number that we're using, that modulus n, the clock size. That's a pretty big number, but it's not as big as like a YouTube video, for instance. So how are you going to encrypt with that there? Turns out most of the time RSA is just used to transmit keys, like AES encryption keys, rather than using RSA directly itself. So when I had mentioned, how are you going to transmit that secret key to Mr. Stallone, you can use RSA to transmit that securely. Also, when I mentioned checking out that lock icon on the HTTPS websites, you'll notice that a lot more of them are using this thing called ECC, elliptic curve cryptography. That's being used more often because the keys are a lot smaller, and that seems to be more common these days. And then lastly, You might have heard that quantum computers threaten to break all of security. Turns out it's mostly just algorithms like RSA or ECC, ones that rely on that math. The idea that it's really hard to break up a number into the other numbers that you multiply together. Turns out to be theoretically not so hard for quantum computers to do. The only problem is that a quantum computer to break RSA would need at least twice the key size in order to break it. For really strong encryption, that's like 8,000 bits. So you're going to need like a 16,000 bit quantum computer to crack that. I think what's the biggest we're at like now, like a few dozen at most. So we got a ways to go until all of security is destroyed. But some stuff like AES encryption, that's safe at this point. So with that, that's about all I got to say. Hopefully you have an idea of what it is to encrypt things with RSA. So hopefully that
Great
wasn't
talk,
too quick.
man.
Thanks.
My brain hurts a lot from that, but I'm getting it a little bit better.
Good. I was hoping at least the clock out analogy would make it a little easier.
Well, we got any questions before I shut down the stream? Well, I'll
Have you
take that
played
as-
around at all with any of the ECC post quantum stuff at all?
I have looked at it, and that's about it. If I ever figure out how ECC works, I might talk on that next. But the post-quantum stuff is that gets into like PhD level math, so I might not ever get there.
Yeah, I actually ran into an issue today where Google Chrome and one of their, I think it was like a month ago, they came out with a new update to Google Chrome where they enabled like this post-quantum cryptography feature that's like it's a feature flag that you can turn it off, but it's called it's for Kyber quantum resistant key agreement algorithms for TLS 1.3, and it can break access to a lot of websites, especially like internal websites. So that's been something I know. It's been interesting. I know a lot of browsers that are starting to push it more and more on folks, and luckily you can deactivate it right now because I still find it a little experimental.
Right.
But yeah, I guess more to come with that as well.
Yeah, and RSA has been around since the 70s, so they've had plenty of time to ingrain it into everything that we do.
Yeah, definitely.
I'd like to
Yeah,
give a little shout out to Whitfield Diffie. It's an interesting thing when you
Yeah.
look into the history of it, right? I mean, there was a critical point where Whitfield wanted to release that information to the public about which I guess what he discovered, which eventually became the Whitfield Diffie key exchange, and the powers that be almost stopped him from publishing it in Scientific American, but got to him too late.
Yeah, I'd read a little bit about that. Didn't really have a good place to fit it into the presentation though. But yeah, Diffie and Hellman were I guess the inspiration for these guys making RSA. So definitely interesting to look at.
And another interesting spinoff because I've been tracking micropayments and e-commerce for a long, long time. There's some interesting stuff done by David Chaum, famous cryptographer, and he tried to bake it into a product called eCash. Like the company was called DigiCash, and it was a spinoff of RSA called Blind Signatures. which I found out about in detail when I got the book written by Bruce Schneier, Applied Cryptography, which I recommend anybody to get. Just pay for it in cash.
Well, cool. Hey, thanks, TechnoBoozer, for the talk. It definitely hurt my brain, but I'll have to review it and see if I can't make myself understand it a little better. Implementation is one thing, understanding the math behind it is completely a different story. So,
For
thanks so
sure.
much, man.
Yeah, no problem. I hope to break your brain again soon.
Sounds like a plan.